back to BlockTV. It's time now for HODL Withheld, a chance to zoom out for a moment and take a wider perspective on some of the heady issues that dominate the crypto markets as a whole. And to guide us on this journey of discovery, we're joined by Bitcoin influencer and thought leader, Dan Held. He's also the co-founder of asset management firm Interchange. Dan, great to have you on with us again. And you know, when we're looking, we were just talking before we started about Asia Blockchain Summit and some of the hype around that. You know, you've been on the scene for a long time. How does what you see today compare to I don't know, Bitcoin's earlier days?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey from Bitcoin's origins in the cities like San Francisco and New York all the way, through to today, where there's a lot of different other crypto assets. There's blockchain technology, distributed ledger tech, which is a more, suit sort of style business where you see a lot of guys from consulting firms and banks. And so, I like to remind everyone Bitcoin, like where Bitcoin started, especially in San Francisco, which is kind of the tech mecca for the world. And in San Francisco, Bitcoin actually started at this really grungy, the Bitcoin community started at this really grungy, really kind of underground place called 20 Mission. And it was a former kind of crack house that had been converted into a hacker house. And that was done by Jared Kenna, who is the co-founder of TradeHill, the first US exchange ever to be created. And they launched in 2011. But in tech, being early is the same as being wrong, and ultimately they didn't succeed, and that's why you hear about companies like Coinbase or Kraken rather than TradeHill. But it was really interesting because, at that time, when I went to the first Bitcoin meetup in San Francisco in January 2013, my first one that I went to, there was only about 12 of us in a cooler of PBRs. I mean, at that time, Bitcoin wasn't even cool in San Francisco. And so, the people that were around back then were very much libertarian cypherpunk types. So these are the types that, really, really respected their privacy. A lot of them worked on, decentralized tech on the torrenting side, like Bram Cohen or, a couple other individuals as well. And so it's really interesting to see that community kind of, start from this like really anarchist cypherpunk. And nowadays, when you go to conferences, there's a kind of a wide spectrum, or if we go to different meetups. I just went to a meetup in LA, a blockchain meetup, and it was very much suits and everyone trying to figure out what DLT is and blockchain tech and how that might improve their corporate business rather than kind of that early cypherpunk roots. So it's been wild to see the journey. I mean, the idea that Bitcoin survived this long to influence the world this much is awesome. But I think everyone should remind themselves, why Bitcoin was created. It was an antidote to bad central banking policy, and it was meant to disrupt the existing financial system. Bitcoin isn't a cute crypto kitty that you can use to trade fucking Pokemon on the blockchain. Bitcoin was meant to disrupt central banks, which is hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of impact.
Right, and we're already seeing central banks react to that. We're seeing some other enterprise reactions to that. But what does it take to stay in the game? So the people that were involved back then, 8, 9, 10 years ago, are you still seeing the same faces? Did they phase out? Did they evolve? Did they get with I guess this new zeitgeist that Bitcoin is leading? How do you manage to hold in both camps?
Yeah, we saw a few definitely progress from those early cypherpunk roots. You've got like Jed McCaleb, who's a great example. Jed created Mt. Gox. He then went on to create Ripple and Stellar. And so Jed, has kind of made the transition from early Bitcoiner to this later stage of building, one of the first exchange, or one of the first exchanges. I think Mt. Gox is the first, creating the first exchange and then going from there and building other cryptocurrencies. So he was one who survived a long time. You've got like Jesse Powell as well from Kraken. Jesse was one of the early users of Mt. Gox, and then from there plowed his own Bitcoins into Kraken, and it's to build and really scale that business. And so it's been really interesting seeing like those two progressed from the very, very earliest days till now. And I think a lot of it had to do around trading. Whoever built trading infrastructure or built anything trading related, those were very profitable businesses, and they were able to continue to be relevant through till today.
But you have to think that at least when you're talking to Bitcoin maximalists, or at least not even that, that's considered a slur in some circles. But Bitcoin advocates, people that think very deeply and feel very strongly about Bitcoin, you're still getting that libertarian vibe from them. You're still getting those grand and lofty ideas of getting rid of centralized banks. I mean, does that exist anywhere, maybe in more of a niche places in the ecosystem today?
I think that culture is primarily preserved in Bitcoin. You hear a lot of other cryptocurrencies say they're decentralized enough, they're distributed enough, they have, there was a founder's reward, but it was small enough. Mm-hmm. Or we've got, hybrid proof of work, proof of stake, which compensates for a lack of proof of work or a lack of hashing power to protect the network. And so I believe that this technology has to survive in the future against a very, very intense enemy, which will be states. And I don't think we've seen any states really care up until this point. But I think we're going to see a future where you've got very large hedge funds and really big state actors who, the hedge funds have a financial incentive to disrupt these protocols, as they could short some of them and do a 51% attack. And you have governments who don't care about the money, and they see it as a threat to their sovereignty. And so we have to remind ourselves that Bitcoin was purpose-built to be super, super robust in order to survive attacks like that, to survive attacks from any government in the world. And so I don't see a lot of other communities with that kind of like hyper focused mindset on being super resilient. I think a lot of other communities go, okay, we're willing to sacrifice security for this. We're willing to sacrifice decentralization for this. Whereas Bitcoin's community won't compromise on these things in order to stay as strong as possible. And I think that very much reflects the early cypherpunk roots. I think there's other great communities too, like Monero and Zcash, where they focus on privacy. And I think that is a nice glimmer of sort of the remnants of those earlier cultures in the space where, it was very anti-state, very anti-authoritative, and privacy coins reflect that quite a bit.
It's interesting when we're talking about the early days of Bitcoin. We're talking about San Francisco, like you said. These days, Bitcoin is widely available, and you can get it anywhere. And then with some services, you don't even need an internet connection. Basically, if you know about it and you want it, and you're willing to pay to purchase it, you can access it. So, and some of the countries or locations that you see Bitcoin used most is places like South America, like Far East Asia. We're seeing adoption in Africa. Those are places that benefit from some of the characteristics of Bitcoin, and it says a lot about those early roots in San Francisco, how far Bitcoin has come.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about when people complain, I would have bought some Bitcoin if I had completed my KYC AML at Coinbase. I had a couple friends in the last 2017 bubble complain to me about that. And I'm like, well, that back when I had to buy Bitcoin in 2012, we had to wire money to a fucking exchange called Mt. Gox in Japan, right, which was made for Magic the Gathering cards, So, I mean, it's people don't realize how easy it is now. Like you said, there's a lot of different ways to buy Bitcoin. You can have Cash App, Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini. And I am assuming TD Ameritrade and E-Trade and all of these will have all these brokerages. And so right now it's really exciting to see the capability for everyone in the world to buy Bitcoin. Whereas back in the day, I mean, you had to I used BitInstant too. I tried that out, and that was super weird. I mean, I was just out of college, and sending a couple $100 overseas through a really opaque process that I didn't understand took a lot of faith. Let's put it that way.
Well, but when with this retrospective, we're looking back. surely not everything rolled out perfectly when it comes to Bitcoin. I think if you look at the white paper, the ideas that it holds within, and realities for today, do you think Satoshi Nakamoto may have tweaked it a bit if he could go back and do a do-over?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite questions, which is like, what did Satoshi do wrong? Because everything went really, really right. If we look at Bitcoin's launch, it's equivalent to a rocket ship launch. Everything has to be perfectly tuned and perfectly coordinated in order for that launch to go off successfully. Otherwise, the rocket explodes on the launch pad. And what we've seen so far is that Bitcoin has made it pretty far along the way to the path, on the way to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say some of the things that he did wrong, which may not really compromise the launch itself, but maybe change the trajectory of the path, would be a few. Like one thing would be his where he put the decimal.
Right.
We could have had 21 billion Bitcoins. People have a per unit bias, which means they buy the cheap Ripple.
Mm-hmm.
Or other crypto assets that have a low per unit value. And so, there's a pro and a con to this. The con is that people view it as too expensive. The pro is that people view it as very valuable. So
Right.
Bitcoin's value, being worth thousands and tens of thousands, speak to its value. If it was always worth a sub penny or sub dollar, people may never consider it to be to be worth anything of value. But personally, I've seen the per unit bias happen to almost every single individual that I've talked to about Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a complaint that I have.
Well, maybe we can start talking in Satoshis. I don't recall, and I apologize. I don't remember the source, but somebody had put on Twitter this week how one Satoshi is already more valuable than a list of 6 or 7 national currencies at the moment. So maybe we can start talking Satoshis.
Yeah, a lot of the Bitcoin community loves the subunit of Satoshis,
Right.
and I think that's pretty cool. I definitely think it's a more niche thing in our community rather than something that's going to be adopted. But they're right. As Bitcoin's value increases, the only way to really denominate Bitcoin will be in Satoshis, because people don't think in decimal places.
Right.
I'm not like, hey, let me go send you 0.001 BTC. It's it's like, hey, I'll send you $5. Bitcoin is largely not the unit of account yet. Due to its volatility, the purchasing power of that unit of account changes quite a bit. So I don't really see people quoting Satoshis other than very niche Bitcoin community. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's just going to take a lot of time to get there. But I definitely agree that Satoshis will likely be the unit of account in the future, just due to its more easily calculable value.
Yeah, and then the asset is the same at the end of the day. But moving on, one of the big stories to come out, courtesy of Bloomberg this week, was the whole discussion about how Bitcoin is being used for criminal activities. They had a headline come out saying, already people are using $1 billion worth of Bitcoin for money laundering, prostitution, all these nasty things. Again, 10 years in, we're still hearing this story. Even Bloomberg acknowledges that actual use of Bitcoin for illicit activities is on the decline, but this is, remains an ongoing narrative. How do you think about that?
Yeah, what's funny is that Bitcoin has survived and thrived, even though the public narrative of what Bitcoin's utility is, whether it be money laundering or drug dealing, has been largely negative. I mean, can you imagine how well Bitcoin's going to do when the narratives become positive? When people speak highly of it, people compliment it, people go, "Oh, this is great! A great tool for freedom." I think any new technology is always met with skepticism.
Right.
And if we look at, there's a Twitter account called the Pessimist Archive. And the Pessimist Archive, they take out newspaper clippings from like the 1850s, 1880s, and they'll pull out stuff around, bicycles. And then they'll zoom a little bit into the future from like the 1930s and pull out quotes from like people's concerns around the radio, where people complain that
It's going to corrupt the youth, yes. And
yeah, for example, like with bicycles, that children can bicycle too far away from home and that will destroy the family vibe, you know?
Right.
And so with every new technology, people are very skeptical, especially one that enables freedom, because to enable true freedom, you have to be willing to take the good and the bad. And so it was natural that the early content and narrative around Bitcoin would focus on its illicit use cases because people are afraid of new technology. What's funny is that when you read these articles, they never compare, as Jameson Lopp kind of hilariously put there, you know, the U.S. there's $1 trillion in fiat that's used,
Right.
U.S. fiat annually that's used for drugs, right? So, of course, the article doesn't highlight that. Of course, the article, you know, doesn't really focus on, okay, yes, Bitcoin is a money, but there's also these other monies that are used for illicit purposes, but they just use it more as a smear campaign. And I think a lot of this, you know, dealing with this for the last 7 years since I've been in this space, it largely degraded my perspective of media, because they've been saying this for 7 years, and it's very slanted, very focused on just painting Bitcoin in a bad light versus focusing on what really matters, which is that, you know, Bitcoin is about freedom. It's about enabling people to be free, and they're free to do any transaction they'd like, which a lot of those are very, very, I think, wholesome transactions that are good for people's individual sovereignty. And you know what? I respect people's rights to buy whatever they'd like. I'm not here to question what they put into their body. If they want to put a cheeseburger in, gain 300 pounds, and then you know, have diabetes, go for it.
Right.
If you want to take illicit substances that your government doesn't recommend, I'm not here to stop you.
Right. No, and that brings us full circle to the beginning of our conversation, and the spirit of freedom and you know, original thought and independent thought, and a great place to finish off. Dan Held, thank you very much for joining. That was a great segment, great thoughts there. Of course, we'll do this again next week. Those of you at home, don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with more news and updates on cryptocurrency and blockchain news.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.